Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of One Vision, the FinTech Views. This is Theo, your host for today's episode. Joining us today is a wonderful friend and return guest of the show, Simon Kemp, otherwise known as the Chief Analyst of DataReportal and founder of Kepios. Welcome back, Simon.
Thanks, Theo. Great to be back. Great to nerd out again.
I can't wait to dig deeper because someone has been busy since we last talked. Next thing you know, I went online and vroom, there's a data dump of files, different countries, global, different sector, demographics, however you want to slice and dice it. Get us up to speed. Digital 2026, what are we looking at?
A lot, a huge amount. So between the last time we spoke, Theo, which was about 6 months ago, and today we have published 23,500 pages of data reports. I have been in my data cave, hence me looking a little bit caveman. This is not a permanent look. So for those of you looking at me and going, he's gone all Jack Dorsey, I actually intend to look a little bit more sort of like I used to, should we say, a bit less hair. But yeah, it's been absolutely crazy. So for the last, for 100 days exactly, between August the 4th and November the 11th inclusive, so it was 100 days of solitude, in the data cave, producing the Digital 2026 report. So every single country in the world, with 3 exceptions, North Korea not having any digital means it's quite difficult to write a report about it. But every other country in the world, pretty much, we've got new data on internet adoption, social media use, mobile connectivity, e-commerce, advertising, but you name it, anything you need to understand about how the world is using digital technologies, this is your latest overview. Now, the reports are designed to raise more questions than they answer. So do be prepared. You're going to go in there, you're going to find some great stuff, but you're going to come out going, I want to know more about this. And that's exactly what sessions like today are for. So thank you, Theo, for having me back so that we can dive into the things that matter to you and to your audience, because that's exactly what this is about us going on this learning journey together. Because as you'd probably imagine, I don't know those 23,500 charts off by heart. So there's still stuff for me to learn in the stuff that I've produced as well.
I was going to quiz you. Okay. All right. Well,
go ahead. We can test.
Here's the first elephant in the room. You know exactly which pile I was going to dive right into. AI.
Yes.
The number caught my eye. Actually, a few numbers, but the first one, you say in the report, over 1 billion people are now using standalone AI tools every month. Can you tell us a little bit more? Because I'm like, okay, how do you get to 1 billion? And how do you define standalone AI? And more importantly, what does that even mean?
Yeah, the last one's the most important, but we'll come back to that in a bit. So actually, that figure's quite conservative. I wanted to put in a figure because everybody needs a hook on which to start their conversations around this. And we've agreed, I suppose, as an industry, as society broadly, that AI is big and important. But until you've quantified it in some way, it's difficult to get a sense of scale and therefore whether or not you should be changing the way things happen or not. So the figure came from, there's changes every week. So by the time that this podcast airs, I'm guessing that there's going to be a new figure out there, and this will sound very awkward and dated. It'll be as bad as my haircut in terms of how well it looks later. But you have some statements from people like Sam Altman at OpenAI saying that they have now over 800 million weekly active users. I don't even know if that's the latest one. I'm checking my diaries. I look, he might have announced something even today because that figure is going up rapidly, but that's 800 million weekly. Now, we then compared that with some fantastic data we get from SimilarWeb, which looks at the use of the ChatGPT specifically. So ChatGPT's mobile app and also its website. And analysis of that data over recent months suggests that monthly active users are roughly 1.3 times higher than weekly active users. So that alone already takes us to the billion user mark. But then we've also got some more great data from that SimilarWeb data sets that suggest that while ChatGPT is the biggest, and typically anybody that uses AI, there's a good chance that they might use ChatGPT at least once in a month. But actually 1 in 5 active AI users do not appear to use ChatGPT in a month. That might mean they use it every couple of months. It's not like they never use it. But in a given month, out of 5 people that are using AI, 4 of them will be using ChatGPT. and probably other platforms as well. But one of them will only be using one of the non-ChatGPT platforms. So that gives us another big bump, right? So that's another 20% on top, 25% on top of the ChatGPT number, which is really interesting. And then you've got the fact that ChatGPT is ostensibly blocked in China. And so you've got this entire second largest population in the world, and they tend to be very tech oriented. They tend to embrace new technologies very quickly. Getting an exact figure out of China is a little bit sticky, as it is for almost everything in digital. There's an awful lot of big numbers being bandied about. But I did find some research that I felt was conducted in a reliable kind of way. So a credible number of 250 million people regularly using AI agents, which I'm interpreting as being these standalone tools. I'll come to your second bit of the question in a minute. So in all honesty, like I said, the billion is probably very conservative. If I look at those numbers and I am being a little bit more kind of like, if I was giving my exact number, I'm looking at 1.55 billion as of the start of October, which is already, 6 weeks ago as we're recording today. So that's a big number, right? 1.5 billion people using these tools every month. But you're going to ask me what the standalone bit is. So standalone for me is an LLM or a Gen AI platform. I'm going to throw our jargon out here. So a large language model, which is very much like the ChatGPT, the Claudes, that kind of stuff. Gen AI being things like, if you're creating imagery, but realistically, I don't have enough reliable information for that. So this is largely based just on LLMs. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't include things like Meta AI, which is essentially just an AI-powered search engine within Facebook. The user themselves doesn't care whether it's AI. They're looking to find something. They didn't ask it to be an AI, and therefore the fact that it's powered by AI doesn't really fit into the equation. So we ignore those figures, even though they're interesting. It doesn't include things like Copilot when it's baked into Office, but it does include the standalone Copilot. It's very confusing. They've got the same name, but they're not the same thing. Things like Gemini, when it's used within Gmail, similarly, we don't include those numbers. And we've actually got data from Google saying that more than 2 billion people are using AI overviews in search every month. So, I mean, even that figure is just crazy, right? So I think that the 1.5 billion figure is important because it's people who have consciously decided to go and use an AI tool, and it's not like it's been imposed upon them or they've accidentally used it without realizing what it is. That was a very long answer to start with. Sorry, Theo.
No. I'm trying to do math in here because that is a huge number.
It is big, right?
And like you say, is going up every day. So with that being said, what are some of the top usage that you found in your report? What are they using it for?
Yeah, this is fascinating. We could quite easily spend the next 3.5 weeks talking about this. So you interrupt me as soon as I start talking too much, right? So we've got two really good data sets in the report this year that we have obviously taken from the third party. So really important to understand the reports that we publish at DataReportal, they're all powered by third party research. I don't go out and interview people on the street myself. So this is all third party data.
Next thing you know, you can deploy agents to do that.
Do you know, we should talk about that a little bit later because that is a really important question. But no, at this stage, there is no way of getting an AI to go out into the physical world and do the kind of research that I need to do, which is frustrating. I don't know how long that will take before that becomes the case. But I have my slides in front of me. I want to make sure I get this right because it's only been a day or two that I've actually sat down after publishing and I've been able to get used to this data. So the first of these studies was published in Harvard Business Review by a chap called Mark Zhao Sanders. Sorry if I pronounced the name wrong, Mark. This is looking at what people say they're using various different kinds of AI tool for in public forums. So they'll go into a public forum and they'll say, I'm using AI for this. And they have conversations about how do you get the information you want, blah, blah, blah. So this is really interesting. It's based on huge numbers of conversations in platforms like Reddit, Facebook, all that kind of stuff. So lots and lots of different forum-y, socially kinds of conversations around this, and across a large number of different kinds of tools. So this is including things like AI chat bots, and by that I mean things like character AI and stuff. So it's not just LLM platforms like ChatGPT. So the thing that's really coming through strongly in Mark Zhao Sanders' work is that therapy and companionship is the most frequent use case. Now, I guess that there's a certain degree of sample coloring, shall we say. So the fact that people are going out and talking about this suggests that this is a topic that they're very happy to talk about rather than necessarily being the only thing that people are doing on there. But that's the one that ranked strongly. Next is organizing my life, which I find really, really interesting because it very clearly demonstrates that this is increasingly consumer behavior. This is not just business oriented. And we'll come back to that a little bit later because I really want to dig into that one, the comparison between person on the street versus business use of this. I was shocked by the data, but I'm going to leave that as a little cliffhanger and we'll come back to that. And then the third one in this particular data set is finding purpose. And I confess, if you were going to, everybody always likes to finish these conversations with what was the thing that you found most surprising in this quarter's data. I'm going to preempt that question. This was the one that really stood out for me. I mean, I know that people are going in and having, I'm going to call them religious conversations because it's the only really way I can sort of describe it in a sort of straightforward way. Understanding my place in the universe and my broader purpose as a human being. That's such a deep, profound conversation. And we're having it with robots. There's something ironic and beautiful about that. Yeah, now, this is the interesting thing, right? I think that there's an awful lot of, as soon as I say that to anybody, and I've had a couple of conversations about this over the past few weeks, as soon as you say it, people have very strong reactions. You've got one group of people that immediately go and go, they're horrified and they're like, how can you possibly do that? And then you've got another group of people that are like, when you look at the loneliness epidemic, when you look at the fact that people find it often very difficult to open up when they're already in a position of mental challenge, that this ability to express themselves to something that is perhaps less judging than a human may be a good thing. Now, we've heard the horror stories, and we know that things can go horribly wrong here. So I think we need to be very, very careful how we approach this. But you can speak to the wrong human and they can give you bad advice. And I think we just got to be conscious of the fact that this is not just because these tools have learned from the way that humans behave and the way that humans communicate online in particular. And so they've learned the best and the worst of us. And unfortunately, that manifests in the kind of stuff that they respond to when we give it a query. So that's the first data set. Let me just jump very quickly because I know you've got loads of questions, but I want to focus in on ChatGPT.
Question marks floating in my head, right?
I can. So ChatGPT being the biggest, like we said in those numbers bits in the earlier question, I think just looking at what people are using ChatGPT for, now this is based on millions of queries from hundreds of thousands of users. So this is a massive data set directly from ChatGPT itself. It was anonymized, apparently, which is fascinating. But the number one thing coming through in ChatGPT usage is people seeking specific information. That's a little bit woolly. I think we'll come back to that one in a bit. Then editing and critiquing user-provided text. I'm guessing in many cases that's please rewrite this email so it doesn't quite have my passive-aggressive horror show in it. And then the third one, I actually find this really encouraging. So the third one is tutoring and teaching, people wanting to learn how to do things to improve their skills. And that to me is really, really compelling. Now, just to give you some share information on this. So seeking information was 18% of total conversations. Editing and critiquing user-provided text was 11%. And then tutoring and teaching was 10%. Then you've got another 20-something different things, and it very quickly drops down to just a share of 1 or 2% amongst those. So, you've got your three really big ones, a couple of semi-big ones. The fourth one, just out of interest, was seeking how-to advice, which I kind of feel is like similar to the tutoring and teaching. So yeah, let me pause there and let's have a conversation rather than me sprouting lots of trivia at you.
So the part about, seeking information, editing, critiquing, tutoring, teaching, I am not too surprised, just judging from, the people around me and what we use the tools for. I think last time when we talked, I do use them for, to suggest titles for podcasts, for example, like the one that we are doing right now, right? Because it can come up with something really interesting and then I mishmash different parts of it. People using it for editing, copywriting, I've seen those before as well, right? Those are normal. People seeking information, tutoring, teaching, I've seen that as well because my son uses that. So those I've seen semi-common, normal use cases. Now, back to what you were saying earlier, companionship.
Yeah.
Finding purpose. It almost feels like as a reflection on how these tools are being designed, not just quote unquote learning from us, but with the intention of keeping us engaged and keeping us hooked to that particular platform, even though certain circumstances might call for you really need to seek human help, right?
Yeah.
As in, some of the tragic cases we've seen, where parents accused the platforms of saying, you really should not have continued to engage my child in these particular circumstances, which lead them to very unfortunate outcomes. So
yeah,
I can see that. And I can see when you were talking about loneliness, it almost feels like is a reflection of how we are in today's society. I don't think that it should be the solution. Now, that could just be me, my midlife crisis kicking in, like, come on, this is not right. But I don't know. I almost feel like this is making it worse, right? Because we have been there before. I still remember vividly, earlier today, I was actually going through some photos with my daughter that we took back in 2020 in the onset of COVID. And we're talking about how, we were at home all the time. The only way we were communicating with people were through the screens. And how when things eased up, we crave human interaction. And I still crave human interaction. And I feel like those 2.5 years that we were home and schools were mostly closed, I felt like we're in a black hole, right? I lost that part. And a lot of the subsequent conversations I've been having, even as recent as last month, we dated back, pre-COVID, we did XYZ. That was like such a huge milestone. I have problem processing that this is going to be the outcome that we're going to go into, is like, chatting with a bot. Tell me ma raison d'être. I don't know.
Yeah, it's weird. I confess, I'm also uncomfortable about it, but I think I approach it in a very... If you think about your particular circumstances in the world and you then use that and that colors your judgment of what is actually happening in there. And I did get really quite, nervous about it when I first started seeing this data set, and I went out and I had a look on a lot of you've got some fantastic, very credible, I don't know what the technical term for this, the medical side of psychology, so people that are actually professionals in this field that understand the nuances of how people's brains work. And a lot of them were actually quite, they were a lot more balanced in their view on this. I think the idea that you are starting to express some of your problems is a step forward. So as everybody would tell you, that the first step to solving a problem is acknowledging you've got one. And I think in many cases, this idea that you have started to express that you have issues that you want to talk about is a stepping stone. Now, the danger is that it's the only one that you use. I think that's where the troubling bit of this comes, is that these tools have not been designed with this particular purpose in mind, and therefore the guardrails and the safeguards and all that kind of stuff are not there. But at the same time, I think there is a very clear opportunity for benefit here. It just needs to be something that we understand a lot better, because we don't understand how these tools work, and therefore we can't predict what they're going to say in a particular thing. You can design a tool that may be better at helping with this particular situation. So there may be a chatbot that is specifically designed with all of the important safeguards in place. At the moment, I don't believe that any of those LLM tools that are out there is that. So I would caution against even thinking about it. But I think, there are the people that have genuine crises, if you like, of mental health, where there might be a benefit to it. But I think let's park those for now, because I am not a psychologist and it would be very dangerous for me to start hypothesizing from my comfortable position of I look at data. But I think that there's this there's a very much less serious middle, people that are just going through sort of like, why am I here? How do I have a happier life? Or, just questions, that the things that you lie in bed at night thinking about and just feeling a little bit like lost and frustrated about, but it's not like it's going to stop you from functioning day to day.
The things that we talk to our pets, for example, maybe. Right?
The shower thoughts I like to think about. So it's like, if my life was 1% better tomorrow, what would 1% look like? And I think that the finding purpose one is fascinating. So my relationship with a higher being, this is a very personal conversation, but let's do it anyway. So my relationship with a higher being has always been a little bit complicated, because as a data person, I am a great believer in proof. And anybody that's listening today, don't worry, because I'm gonna bring this back to some of the most fundamentally profound questions about this kind of stuff. I like proof, and therefore I have my sort of questions about almost everything that's out there. But at the same time, one of the things that I learned by going through this journey of being a data nerd was that the absence of proof does not correlate with a negative. It simply means that you have not found proof. And that doesn't mean that it's not true. And therefore, I believe that until I have conclusive proof either way, I must be agnostic about this fact. So I am not either for or against any of this kind of stuff. I mean, it's one of those questions that remains a journey of investigation, of looking for signs and signals. And, it's just one of those brilliant things. And I think what's nice about that finding purpose piece is that people have questions about it. I think if everybody was just adamant that this was the answer and that's it, I would be more nervous about that. Whereas if people are going out and they're asking questions, even if they have strong faith, then that means that they're developing that faith. It means that it's working for their needs, which is exactly what faith needs to be doing. Now, in many cases, it's probably a completely open question of what on earth is going on, and that is just a question of us all being lost as human beings for our entire lives. It's just a reality of being human, right? But the idea that we're talking to robots about it is the bit that I can't quite reconcile. It feels so ironic. It feels like if you had the opposite of God, in my mind, it would be a machine. And I don't know why I feel that way. It just feels like they're not necessarily, it's not opposite in a sort of single spectrum. It's just like they're almost like juxtaposing each other.
The truth is out there. That's all I can think of as I'm listening to you is the X-Files.
So I think the reason I feel that way is like the concept of a God is very much about, and this is probably a dangerous word to use, but it's mysticism and magic because we don't understand it. I don't mean that in a derogatory way at all. Whereas machines are logic. They're almost the opposite of my way of thinking about that kind of deity thing, right? So yeah, I mean, that whole thing has just opened up all sorts of questions in my mind about, if you think about where Google search exists in our lives, we go in with very defined questions. We're looking for very quick answers, and we have honed our behavior, and Google has honed its proposition to say, where's the nearest coffee shop near me? And you find it and off you go. And it's a very transactional, and rightly so, interaction. These kinds of things that are happening on AI are completely different. And that is the perfect segue, Theo, into the commercial side of this. So we've come from literally the sublime to the slightly more ridiculous here. We're going into so what does this mean for businesses and organizations? And obviously you've got your particular industry focus. So let's dig into that. But I think what I'm taking out from this is that the way that people use AI and LLMs in particular, the way that they're using that is actually very different to the way that they're using search. And therefore the most important commercial takeaway from all of this data, beyond God and everything else, is these are not replacements. These are additions. And therefore we're going to be using them side by side for the foreseeable future. And certainly in your decision-making horizon, in your planning horizon as a business person listening to today, you should not be thinking, I'm going to move activity out of search and into LLMs, because that would actually be compromising success. What you want to be doing is building these things side by side, at least for the foreseeable future. That's what the data tells us.
But that brings in an interesting question, because I remember last time when we talked, we did dig into the Google search stats, right? And it would seem like people are gravitating more towards using the Gen AI tools to do their search rather than the traditional Google search. As a matter of fact, I think there was a figure that someone mentioned in a different conversation that about 20% of purchase decisions nowadays is being done with one of these tools, such as ChatGPT. So that brings out a whole different question. If that's the case, how do we decipher these? Because it almost feels like, are they gravitating towards it? At least from an industry perspective, it would seem like every single day we hear about agentic commerce, and is going to take over people going to traditional websites. But is that true?
Absolutely not. So I'm gonna pour a lot
Myth
of
busting from Simon.
I'm gonna pour cold water over an awful lot of this stuff. So will it be the future? Quite possibly. Is it happening today? Can you name one person, even in our incredibly, I mean, we are the top 1% of the tech nerd folks, right? We are likely to be early adopters of everything. Just the nature of us being people having this conversation today. Do you know anybody in your social circle that has outsourced the entirety of their grocery purchasing to an agentic system? No.
Nope.
Do you know anybody that does anything purely agentically and doesn't look at the thing before their credit card gets used? I don't. I'm sure there are one or two people out there that are the exception to the rule simply to prove a point. But realistically, the vast majority of people in our audiences are unlikely to do this based on the data that I'm seeing within the next decade. They may introduce it into their decision making, but they will not rely on it only. And I think the 20% figure that you cited just now about people are, I can't remember exactly how you phrased it, but the implication was that now 20% of decisions are being made in LLMs. I do not see that in the data. What I see is that 20% of people will be using these tools as part of their journey, but that role that that particular tool plays at best will be a fraction. So let me sort of step back a little bit here. There's some more great data in this round of reports from GWI, which looks at where people discover new products, brands, and services, where they go to research potential purchases, and then a bunch of other steps on the journey as well. But those two are the most important. When you look at where people are discovering new products and services, search engines still come out top and social media ads come out second, depending on which age group you look at. So actually globally at all age groups, test my memory here, search engines, TV ads, word of mouth, social media ads, I believe. Somebody will correct me, I'm sure, if I'm wrong, and look at the data and say, you got it wrong. But I think, those four things are absolutely brilliant as a top four, because what they tell us is that the diversity is really, really important. Search engines, obviously online, particularly cold-hearted. I'm going and looking for an answer, but I discovered a new brand. This is really, really important. So let's unpack it in a minute. TV ads. It's like, it's been the case for 50, 60, 70 years now. It's an offline channel, much as it's not anymore, because you've got Netflix and Disney Plus and Amazon Prime and blah, blah, blah. So TV is served by the internet, but it's an old school behavior. It's a sit back behavior. It's very much more passive than search. Word of mouth, as organic as it gets. And then social media ads, the one that everybody said was dying. Yeah, let's not kid ourselves. People, stop basing your business plans on headlines designed to get you to click to increase traffic. All of the evidence points to the fact that social media continues to grow, not decline, and we can unpack that in any metric you like. There's been a great series of charts going around recently about the amount of time that people spend on social media and how it's going down. That is based on really, really good research, but there's a caveat to the way that research has been delivered as findings in that particular topic. And I want to come back and discuss that if it's relevant to you. So let me know. But I think those four things are really interesting, right? So where does AI fit within this? Frustratingly, in that particular survey question, AI is not yet offered as an answer option. So we can't see where it ranks. But so what I'm seeing in any data set that I'm looking at, so we've got some great stuff from SimilarWeb again here on click streams and stuff like that. And you look at how people are finding information and then moving through the journey. Yes, increasingly, and definitely it's a hockey stick curve, absolutely, but it is still one tiny part of the overall decision-making journey. And I think we need to be very, very careful how we interpret the hyperbole that we see in the media around this, because it's going to lead to bad decisions if we just base it on headlines. So I'm not saying don't, I'm simply saying this is a yes and not. These are not binary choices. Nothing in any of this is a binary choice. And we've got to stop kidding ourselves that there is this magic one ring to rule them all, because there isn't.
I love that. And I think it's a good call out. It's not binary choice. I think far too often we get so excited with the hype. We're like, oh my God, this is exactly how we're all going to go. And that's it. Just like a decade ago, right? We're all going to go cashless. Cash is dead. Cash isn't really dead. We kind of still need it, especially when your banking apps go down. But, right, it might, our behavior is changing. Doesn't mean that we're all going sideways towards one option. I think that is important to remember. I do want to ask you, though, all of these things that you were talking about, right? Still using search engines, TV ads, word of mouth, social media, different use cases, etc. All of those. Do you see any difference between demographics of people or based on jurisdiction where they are? Or are they all pretty much the same?
No, you were absolutely right in the first suggestion. There's a lot of diversity going on here, and that's a great thing. I think so the most important takeaway from that as a business person is you've got to understand the people that you are trying to engage and assist in whatever way is that your business works, right? So understanding gender is an important consideration in certain situations, but in reality, gender tends not to be the primary driver, with a couple of exceptions, crypto being one. So I know that that's probably going to be of particular relevance to a lot of your listeners. Let's come back to that one in a little bit. But age is definitely a lot more of a driver. So what we're seeing is that young people are significantly more likely to use AI and to use it more frequently than older generations. I wouldn't see that as a surprise. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I think it does have longer term implications. So I think if you start to unpack that data set, what you'll see there is that over time, especially people who are coming online for the first time at the moment, you are likely to see those people adopt different sets of early behaviors, which will then define the rest of their online journey for the rest of their lives. Like the things that we learn, showing our age here. But, when I started on the internet back in the mid-90s, I developed a certain set of habits even prior to prior to Google. So I still remember I was obsessed with Alta Vista, which was my portal of choice. And I remember the weirdest thing, I was quite defensive when Google came along. I was like, no, I must stay faithful and loyal to Alta Vista. Yeah, looking back, I'm a little bit like, why? But, I think the people that are coming online today are going to develop a very much different set of behaviors and ways of doing things online compared to you and I. But people that have been online for more than a couple of years, which is the vast majority of the 6 billion people that are online today. That was one of our biggest headlines, by the way, more than 6 billion people now online. Just drop that little trivia point in. But yeah, the vast majority of those people have been online for more than a couple of years, and therefore they developed behaviors and habits pre-AI. And it's actually, if those are working for you, it takes a long time to undo them, even if something better comes along. So I think what I'm seeing in all the data that I've been exploring is that I'll go in and start somewhere. Regardless of where I start, I'll then move to another one to compare and contrast. So I might start in a search engine and then go and ask my friend Claude. And then Claude will give me a set of LLM answers. And I might even test those in ChatGPT. I might go to Perplexity. I might go somewhere else. I might then go back to search. I might then go and ask some friends in Reddit or on messenger apps. I might then not make a decision and then see an out-of-home ad on a bus shelter somewhere. This journey is complicated. So Google a few years back coined the term messy middle. So there's a start and there's an end, and everything else in the middle is just a morass of stuff. And it's absolutely that. So I think, Theo, your question of do things vary is the most important question we should be asking ourselves. And the only way to answer that is to go in and to look at the data for your particular audience. So what is it that you are engaging them around? What's the topic of conversation? Who are they? What do they want out of the conversation? And then from there, you can start to optimize the kinds of content, the channels, and all that kind of stuff.
And Simon, once again, you brought out yet another important point. They're not monolithic. Right?
No,
we
absolutely.
tend to generalize behavior. X%, here's the deadline. We forget the fact that there are so many different people who are in different points in their lives with different lived experiences that they tend to treat tools in a different way. Just like Asia. I love people saying, Asians do this. Excuse me. Do you know how many countries there are in Asia? Exactly. Do you know the vast differences of people living in Asia? It's like the spectrum is so wide, right?
Yeah.
Which brings me to your 6 billion people figure.
Yes.
Within that, 2 billion of those live in just 2 countries, India and China.
Isn't it? India and China. Yep.
India and China, right? They are home to the huge group of people who are on the internet today. And interestingly, your report also pointed out something else that I saw. At the same time, even though these are like vast majority, India is also home to the greatest number of people who are not online.
Yes.
Again, talk about the vast spectrum of people. Who are some of those who are not represented? And how do we actually bring forth, and as much as we like to celebrate, hey, Here are all these people who are online. Here are all these people who are using AI tools. Who are the ones who are not there?
Yeah. And it's a big number still. So we were getting excited about 1.5 billion people using AI, but more than 2 billion people don't have access to the internet today. And that's probably a slightly more scary big number. Now, admittedly, in that figure, we're going to see a lot of young children. We're going to see a lot of very old people that are not going to use the internet. They've just, it's just not going to happen in their lifetime for whatever reason. So there are groups of people who, for whatever reason, cannot, will not. But as much as that is an important caveat to make, there are significant numbers of people around the world who may want to use the internet, but for a variety of reasons cannot. When you look at the data, some rather unnerving things come through. So in particular, women are still to this day underrepresented in online communities. There are particular, and I'll be very delicate about the way I say this, but you understand what I'm trying to say. There are certain cultures where they are significantly underrepresented. You look at some of the online, offline splits and the demographics of the online community in certain parts of the world, and we're looking at 80% of internet users are men. And there is no excuse for this. This is misogyny at its worst. We are stopping. Men are actively stopping women from using the internet in these places. Now, it might come from a position of genuine care and fear that something bad might happen to them on the internet, but that's a sort of mentality that keeps people locked in their houses. If you look at it in a practical perspective, this is not how to live lives, people. So I know this is not the people listening today. We can get on our high horses and do all sorts of things about it. But if you're looking at organizations like the United Nations, if you're looking at people that want to make progress in opportunities around the world, and especially if we're looking at the unbanked and whatever else, where women continue to be significantly less banked than men, and all sorts of other sort of, in the financial space in particular, there's all sorts of challenges that women face in a lot of these places. But the fact that they don't even have internet access is a fundamental barrier. Because they don't have access to the internet, they have fewer opportunities for education. They have fewer opportunities to research what they might be able to do. They have fewer opportunities to do it discreetly from the comfort of somewhere private in their home and open a bank account if they want to do it secretly. It's just, there's so many challenges associated with just not having this. Now, admittedly, and I think this is a really important point to stress, in many parts of the world where we see low internet access, we also see very low levels of access to basic sanitation and drinking water and electricity. So this is not just misogyny, although I think that's the one that frustrates me the most, because there's no excuse for it, I'm afraid. But when it comes to electricity, many of these people are in rural areas. So the rural-urban divide is very, very clear when it comes to the internet sort of population. So I can't remember the exact figures off the top of my head, but we're looking at like 80, almost 90% of urban populations are online, whereas it's only just over half. I'm going to get the exact numbers for you, otherwise I'll embarrass myself. So 86.5% of the world's urban populations use the internet, and 54.5% of rural populations use the internet. That's quite stark. There's all sorts of reasons. It's not just because of where you live, and actually partly the mentality of where you live may define whether you see the internet as relevant to your life. So there's also, it's not just about whether you can, it's whether you want to. So a lot to unpack there. But yeah, I think, the misogyny one continues to bother me because it's been in this data set for a long time. It is improving, but we're still seeing hundreds of millions of women fewer than men, which just, the demographics of the world population doesn't support that.
I remember reading something around that from the UN around the Financial Inclusion Index. And that is, it mirrors what you say, is there are relatively more women who are unbanked compared to men. And
significantly.
Exactly. And one of the attributes, one of the causes they say is because they don't have internet access. And so digital inclusion is crucial for financial inclusion. There's no way around it. Especially in areas that, you need access, like you say, access to information, access to opportunities, access to education. All of that are crucial for progress. Let's round up with this. Knowing all of these, having a moment to digest the hundreds and thousands of pages of data, and hopefully you'll get a chance to rest up after this. What are your predictions for 2026 or Simon's crystal ball moments?
I think the defining story for 2026 in digital is going to be hyperbole. I think that the media is going to bombard us with stories of trends and developments and whatever else. And I'm actually going to steal a line that somebody else gave to me in a conversation yesterday, is that the digital world moves a lot more slowly than we think it does. And I think that's really, really interesting. I'm obsessed with trends, as you might imagine. But when you look at user behaviors, when you look at how people are adopting these technologies and integrating them into their lives, that progress, if you want to call it that, is significantly slower than the media headlines might have you think. But this translates into, I'm going to bastardize one of the world's greatest quotes. It's like, change happens gradually and then suddenly. And I think this is what we're going to see. So you absolutely, as a digital practitioner in 2026, you need to be keeping your eye on these trends, but you also need to not get led astray by the way that they're being portrayed. I think, when you see them in your own data, when you see all of these things happening amongst your user base and amongst the audiences that you care about, that's the moment to start really acting. Keep your eye on it, know what you will do when it happens, but at the moment you don't need to make fundamental changes. You just need to be ready when you want to implement those changes. If you do it too soon, you're going to waste a lot of money and you're probably going to compromise success. And like we said earlier, Theo, I think that the really important takeaway is all of this is yes and. So even if your plans for next year are identical to this year's, you're not going to fail. You may miss a couple of opportunities, but realistically, you've got a greater chance of failing if you jump ship and do everything differently now. So I think my Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy piece of advice here is don't panic. It's fine. We'll all be okay.
We'll all be okay, and look towards number 42 for actually, totally. You know what? I should go through your reports and see what's on page 42. That would be the answer.
No Easter eggs there, I'm afraid. I can tell you.
No Easter eggs? Come on, Simon.
What's on page 42 is a balance between mobile subscribers and cellular connections. I'm sure there's a good story in there if you try and dig.
I am looking for an Easter egg. Come on. All right. We'll do that next quarter in your new release.
Just for you. Here's the Easter egg.
Answers to the Galaxy. All right. Well, until then, thank you so much, Simon. It's always a pleasure. And I will make sure that we have the link to your reports on the footnotes of the episode as well. And until then, Marvelous. Thank you so much for joining us. And
thanks for having me.
Thank you. And for the rest of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of One Vision. We'll talk to you next week.